1,000 years ago, Norse explorers reached the wilds of North America and vanished. Official history marks their limit at a windswept coastal camp in Newfoundland, with nothing tying Vikings to the distant heartland of Minnesota. But now, clues from ancient DNA and unseen artifacts are upending everything we thought we knew. If these revelations are true, our entire understanding of American prehistory and who first crossed its rivers will have to change. So how close did Vikings really get to the interior, and what evidence has everyone missed? In the far north of Newfoundland, the remains of a settlement offer the only undisputed evidence that Norse explorers set foot in North America over 1,000 years ago. The site, known as Meadows, lies at the very edge of the continent, a windswept place where the Atlantic meets the land. Excavations here began in the 1960s, led by a team that included Professor Anders Hall, whose work helped piece together the daily lives of these early visitors. Layers of turf and timber revealed the outlines of 8 buildings, their design echoing the halls and workshops of Greenland and Iceland. Among the debris, archaeologists uncovered ring-headed bronze pins, spindle whorls, and fragments of iron nails, artifacts unmistakably Norse in origin. The evidence of iron working was especially striking. In one of the outbuildings, a bloomery furnace and heaps of iron slag showed that the Norse were not only repairing ships, but smelting iron from local bog ore. This was not a casual landing, it was a planned operation, equipped for carpentry, boat repair, and toolmaking. Yet for all the material left behind, there were no graves, no cemeteries, and only a handful of personal items. The absence of burials suggests that Meadows was never meant to be a permanent colony. Instead, it functioned as a seasonal camp, an outpost for resource gathering and exploration. Recent advances in precision have given the site new accuracy. In 2021, a team analyzing tree rings and wooden artifacts identified a spike caused by a massive solar storm in 993 CE. This allowed them to pinpoint Norse activity at Meadows to the year 1021, exactly a millennium ago. The settlement's timeline fits within the broader Viking Age, which spanned from about 750 to 1100 CE, a period marked by Norse expansion across the North Atlantic. The Norse were expert navigators, relying on the sun, stars, and memory of coastlines to cross open ocean without compasses. Their longships, with shallow drafts and sturdy hulls, could slip into rivers and shallow bays, making them versatile for both sea and inland travel. The Vinland sagas, written centuries later, describe a land rich in timber, wild grapes, and game, resources that were scarce back home. These texts hint at journeys beyond a single coastal encampment, with stories of rivers explored and forests harvested. Still, the only site that stands on firm archaeological ground is Meadows. This camp, perched between ocean and forest, anchors the known boundary of Norse exploration in North America. It leaves open the question, if the Vikings could reach Newfoundland by ship and set up a working camp, what would have stopped them from pushing deeper inland, following the rivers and forests that stretch toward the continent's heart? Timber, furs, and trade goods pulled Norse explorers ever further from the Atlantic coast. Greenland settlers faced a landscape stripped of tall trees and wild game, forcing them to look west for what their homeland could not provide. The sagas speak of forests so dense their axes rang out for days, and of rivers winding deep into unknown territory, a world of opportunity for those willing to risk the journey. The design of the Viking longship made such exploration more than fantasy. With a draft of less than a meter, these vessels could glide up shallow rivers, hug winding banks, and cross lakes that would ground deeper ships. Crews were practiced in the art of portage, rolling boats overland on logs or hauling them by hand across narrow divides. This was not a desperate improvisation, but a standard practice, honed by centuries of travel along the rivers of Russia and Eastern Europe. Norse traders and warriors, known as Varangians, had already proven that a shallow draft ship could reach from the Baltic to the Black Sea, threading through portages and rapids for thousands of miles. Geography offered more than one possible corridor into the continent's interior. The most direct began at Hudson Bay, where a favorable season could open the ice-choked coast. From there, the Nelson River flows south into Lake Winnipeg, a natural crossroads. The Red River continues the journey, winding toward the Minnesota border and into the Mississippi watershed. Each segment was well within the technical reach of Norse seafarers. Later, French voyageurs would use almost identical routes in birch bark canoes, following trails mapped and maintained by Indigenous nations for generations. An alternative path led down the St. Lawrence River through the Great Lakes and into Lake Superior. Portages linked these inland seas to rivers that drained south and west, offering access to nearly every corner of the upper Midwest. The local terrain was not an obstacle, but a series of stepping stones, each river and lake a link in the chain. With the right timing and knowledge, a crew could travel from the Atlantic to the heart of North America without ever losing sight of water. The practicality of such a journey is not just a matter of ship design or navigation. It is written into the logic of Norse exploration itself. Seek what is scarce at home, move inland for safety, and follow the rivers wherever they might lead. The question is not whether it was possible, but whether the clues left behind can reveal if it truly happened. On a farm in western Minnesota, a slab of gray stone surfaced among the roots of a poplar tree in 1898. Its face was carved with runes, an alphabet once used by Scandinavians, and a date, 1362. The Kensington runestone, as it became known, told of Norse explorers journeying far inland, only to find 10 of their party dead and their fate uncertain. The stone's language and symbols sparked decades of debate. Linguists flagged rune forms and word choices that seemed out of place for the 14th century, while defenders pointed to the evolution of runic writing and the lack of modern tool marks. The runestone's presence along a plausible river route only deepened the mystery. Other objects have surfaced across the upper Midwest, fueling speculation. Norse-style axes and iron tools have been reported from fields and riverbanks in Minnesota and Wisconsin, though most lack the documentation needed to separate medieval relics from later European trade goods. In 1957, an 11th century Norwegian silver penny minted under King Olaf Kyrre was found at a native site in Maine. The coin's journey remains a puzzle. It could have arrived through indigenous trade networks, passing from hand to hand for generations before settling in the soil. Alongside these artifacts, indigenous communities recall stories of strangers arriving by water long before the French or English. Some accounts speak of pale-skinned visitors with unfamiliar tools, their boats gliding silently along the rivers. These memories, passed down through generations, do not name the newcomers, but they linger in the landscape. As Dakota and Ojibwe elders remind us, not all histories are written in stone or ink. Some are carried in story, waiting for the right moment to be heard. In a university lab far from the riverbanks of Minnesota, Dr. Goodmans examines a vial of sediment pulled from a forgotten oxbow lake. The sample, dark with ancient silt, holds fragments of DNA, traces of humans, animals, and plants layered over centuries. Using metagenomic sequencing, her team searches for genetic fingerprints that could rewrite the story of the American interior. Among millions of sequences, they find a handful of markers, low-frequency Scandinavian haplotypes, rare but present, buried deep in strata that date to the medieval warm period between 950 to 1250 CE. The signals are faint, almost washed away by centuries of genetic mixing and the overwhelming presence of indigenous lineages. Dr. Goodman's results are not a declaration, but a question. Are these traces the echo of a brief Norse visit, or the residue of later European movement across the continent? Outside the lab, climate records paint a world in flux. Tree rings and ice cores show a North Atlantic growing warmer, with shrinking sea ice and longer summers. During this window, the routes from Greenland to Hudson Bay opened more often, rivers ran higher, and portages grew less treacherous. The land itself was more open to travelers than at any time before or since. The climate did not guarantee arrival, but it removed one of the greatest barriers to inland exploration. Yet the evidence remains elusive. Scholars warn that genetic signals this feint can be overwhelmed by modern contamination or later admixture. Dr. Goodman's team double-checks every step, reruns controls, and compares their findings against upstream and downstream sites. The result? Tantalizing, but not definitive. The standard for rewriting history remains high: a Norse burial, a sealed camp, or a datable artifact paired with unmistakable Scandinavian DNA. For now, the story pauses at the edge of proof, poised between possibility and doubt, waiting for the next breakthrough to tip the balance. Today, the traces of Norse explorers in Minnesota remain tantalizing but unproven. As DNA technology and Indigenous scholarship advance, the boundary between legend and evidence grows thinner. History isn't fixed, it's rewritten with each discovery. The next breakthrough could change everything. What story will the evidence tell next?